The silver bracelet hit the cold marble floor, echoing a dry, sharp sound through the solemn expanse of Synera's grand hall, where every footstep was weighed against titles and brands. Leah bent down to pick it up, her hand slightly trembling, not because she feared losing something valuable, but because she knew the woman standing less than 2 meters away, the one who had just uttered a line as cold and sharp as steel, was her biological mother. Evelyn Laurent, CEO of Synera, the woman who could alter the course of someone's life with a single glance, was looking at Leah as if she were a stain on the flawless white canvas of the empire Evelyn had built. "Be more careful next time," Evelyn said, in a flat, steady tone. She didn't need to raise her voice. Even a passing glance was enough to make others feel insignificant. "We don't have time to clean up the mess of someone who hasn't learned how to stay on their feet." No one dared to laugh, but no one stepped in either. Leah just bowed her head in silence. But inside, every word felt like molten metal cutting through her chest. The silver bracelet she had just dropped wasn't an ordinary piece of jewelry. It was the only thing she had left from that rainy night back in first grade, the night that powerful woman had left her at the gates of an orphanage without a word of explanation. Leah didn't grow up resenting her. She grew up clinging to a fragile hope that one day, if her mother saw her again, she would open her arms, pull her close, and say the past was just a terrible mistake. But that dream had been unraveling day by day, hour by hour, because the very mother she had always tried to reach was the one who hurt her the most. Evelyn didn't recognize her. Not at all. But Leah recognized her. All too well. And with every insult, every look of disdain, she felt herself breaking apart, tiny piece by tiny piece. She had turned down scholarships and rejected opportunities to see the world just to stay here close to her mother, willing to do any job so long as she could see her every day. She once believed if she were good enough, obedient enough, humble enough, her mother would finally see her. But all Evelyn ever saw was a girl unworthy, without status, without place, not fitting the image of Synera. Leah wondered, how could a mother be this cruel? How could she forget her daughter's face? Or had she truly forgotten even the promise to return for the child she once left behind? No one in that building knew the girl being silently humiliated in the middle of the grand lobby was the flesh and blood of that powerful woman. And that truth, that buried, agonizing truth, was what made every wound utterly unforgivable. Leah could never forget that rainy night. She was only 6 years old, soaked to the bone, shivering in front of the rusted iron gate of the orphanage, with a silver bracelet dangling loosely around her neck on the verge of slipping off. There were no explanations, no promises to return. The woman whom Leah would only later learn was named Evelyn simply turned and walked away, her high heels clicking with deliberate precision until she vanished into the rain without once looking back. Leah waited for days, then months, then years. Every time a car pulled up to the gate, she would run out, hoping this was the day her mother had remembered. But her mother never returned. Not once, not ever. Until one day, a poor woman came to adopt a child. Her name was Clara. She had nothing but calloused hands and kind, gentle eyes. Out of dozens of children, she chose Leah. Not because she was prettier or better behaved, but because, as Clara would later say, the girl didn't cry, but her eyes looked like they were holding tears for someone else. Clara was not wealthy. She wasn't highly educated. She didn't teach through theories or books. But she loved Leah in the way only someone who had once lost everything could. She cooked meals with broken rice, but always set aside the best bite for Leah. She secretly stitched up Leah's worn white school uniform so she wouldn't be teased by other kids. Every time Leah earned a high grade, Clara didn't know how to use fancy words. She would just hug her tightly and whisper, "I'm proud of you for not giving up." Leah grew up with a warm heart, but an emptiness that never fully faded. As much as she loved her adoptive mother more than anyone else in the world, one question haunted her for decades. Why did her birth mother abandon her? Why had she never come back, never searched, not even once? When Leah earned a prestigious scholarship to study abroad, a dream many could only wish for, fate unearthed a past she thought had long gone quiet. While submitting some paperwork, the orphanage administrator handed her a copy of her original birth certificate. There, written in clear letters, was the name of her biological mother, Evelyn Laurent. That name hit her like a tightening grip around her chest. Evelyn Laurent, the woman who was constantly featured in the media, hailed as a feminist icon, the embodiment of success without needing a man's backing. The woman the public celebrated as the queen of compassionate leadership was the same woman who left her in the rain before she could even read. From that day on, Leah changed. She set aside her dream of studying abroad. She declined every offer to leave the country. Instead, she quietly applied to work at Synera, the very company Evelyn had built. No one understood why such an outstanding student would accept an unpaid intern position at a corporation that didn't roll out the red carpet for ordinary people. But Leah had her reasons. She just wanted to see her mother in the flesh, to understand why she was left behind, to be acknowledged, to be called just once daughter. But what she received instead were cold, unfamiliar stares, harsh words, the contempt of the very woman she had hoped would recognize her the moment their eyes met. Evelyn didn't just fail to recognize her daughter. She wounded her more deeply than anyone ever had. She spoke cruelly about bloodlines, about origins, about the kind of people from the lower rungs who think that diligence alone can buy them a place in a world built by those who write the rules. Every time it happened, Leah didn't cry, but deep inside her heart hollowed out more and more day by day. Monday. The 47th floor boardroom of Synera gleamed under harsh white lights and reeked of luxury perfume. Leah sat at the far end of the long table, unnoticed, and deliberately so. This was the quarterly strategy meeting, where Evelyn Laurent personally reviewed key initiatives. No one was allowed to slip up. No one could be dull. And above all, no one was permitted to damage the brand image. Leah had worked 3 nights straight without sleep to finalize her presentation. She wasn't hoping for praise. She only wished her mother might notice her effort. Just a glance of recognition would have been enough. But when the meeting began, Evelyn didn't call Leah's name. She stepped coldly onto the stage, opened a slideshow, and began presenting her personal vision for the rebranding campaign. Everything on that screen was Leah's work. Every line, every graph, every small spark of creativity had come from her. But Evelyn read through it all as if it were her own intellectual creation. No credits, no introduction, nothing. When a senior executive questioned the feasibility of a key element, Evelyn gave a slight smile and replied, "That's something I added myself. My team hasn't caught up with my thinking yet." The room laughed, cold, sharp, like blades slashing across Leah's face. One board member turned to her, voice laced with mockery. "What do you think? Or is this part a bit out of an intern's league?" Leah didn't respond. She just pressed her lips together, her fingers tightening around the corner of her notebook. She knew that if she spoke, the tears would fall. Not because her work had been stolen, but because the very woman who brought her into this world refused to allow her even a place within it. The meeting ended. Everyone slowly trickled out. Leah walked up to Evelyn's desk. She said nothing, just placed a small object on the cold glass surface. A worn old silver bracelet, the edges still marked with faint burn scars. Evelyn glanced at it, mistaking it for some cheap trinket. Leah spoke softly, her voice steady, free of accusation. "This used to belong to my mother. I thought maybe you'd want to keep it now." Then she turned away and walked out of the room without looking back. Every step echoed like a weight pressing on her heart, as if she were walking away from the dream she had carried for 20 years. She no longer needed her mother to recognize her. She didn't need to be called daughter. She only needed to let go so she could stop waiting for something from a heart that had never been hers to begin with. Evelyn stood motionless before the now empty conference table. The overhead light reflected off the glass surface, right where the silver bracelet lay small and silent, like a reminder she could no longer ignore. At first, she didn't pay much mind. Probably just some meaningless trinket left behind by an inept junior staffer. But then, her gaze lingered, and suddenly, the palm of her hand went cold. That bracelet had a very specific scratch on its inner edge, a tiny cut she herself had made years ago in the rush of unfastening it from her own wrist to place it on a 6-year-old girl shivering in the rain. The little girl hadn't cried. She had only clutched Evelyn's hand and asked in the innocent way that all children do, "You'll come back for me, right?" And Evelyn Laurent had nodded, before turning away. Forever. She remembered that night vividly. The orphanage burned down not long after. Evelyn had been told that no child had survived from the room where her daughter had been sleeping. A death certificate had been issued, a funeral held with no body, and she had carried that death like a silent punishment for the rest of her life. No one knew. No one was allowed to know. Evelyn Laurent of Synera could not afford to be seen as weak, much less as a mother who had once abandoned her child. But now, 20 years later, the bracelet had reappeared in the hands of a young woman whose eyes felt too familiar. A voice so composed it chilled the room, and a cold shock rushed from Evelyn's chest to her skull as the pieces finally came together in her mind. The posture, the way she bit her lip, that face, it no longer belonged to a little girl, but it was the one thing Evelyn could not breathe through. She hadn't recognized her daughter, couldn't recognize her, because she had believed she was dead. She had lived with that belief for 2 decades, used it as her shield, not to search, not to grieve, but to continue constructing the perfect persona the world adored. She had lied to herself that the pain had been buried in ashes. But ashes never vanish. They just wait for the wind to rise again. And now, Leah, the child she once held in the rain, the one she walked away from, had grown into a woman who stood before her, endured her gaze, her words, her scorn, without ever revealing who she truly was. Leah didn't need to say the word mom to leave Evelyn exposed. All it took was a silver bracelet, and Evelyn collapsed. She sank into a chair, numb. No one in the office knew what was happening. No one understood why she suddenly left the next meeting without explanation. She needed space, not to think, but to face the cruelest truth of her entire life. Not that she had abandoned her child, but that she had seen her again, looked straight into her eyes, and instead of embracing her, she had become the very person who hurt her the most. The next morning, an urgent announcement was sent to Synera's entire executive division. All staff were to report to the grand auditorium by 9:00 a.m. sharp. No absences would be accepted under any circumstances. No one knew what was happening, but the atmosphere in the office was as heavy as a storm about to break. Some speculated that a major leadership change was underway. Others whispered that Evelyn looked different, not tired, something more unsettling. Fragile, a kind of weakness no one had ever seen in this woman before. At exactly 9 shum, the auditorium was packed. No slides, no podium table, just a single wooden lectern. Evelyn stepped forward, holding a small object wrapped in velvet cloth. No assistant, no PR advisor, just her alone. She looked around the room, then down at the object in her hands. A slow, deliberate breath. Then she spoke. For the first time, her voice was not commanding or polished, but hoarse, like someone relearning how to be human. I have a story I've never dared to tell, not because I forgot, but because I feared that if I did, I wouldn't be able to keep standing here. The room fell completely silent. Evelyn looked toward the back of the hall, where Leah stood, partially obscured behind the crowd. Then she continued. Many years ago, I gave birth to a daughter. Because I was poor, afraid, and too young to be a mother, I left her at an orphanage. I turned away, and I never went back. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people covered their mouths. Others glanced at each other in disbelief. Later, I was told the orphanage had burned down, and they said, no one survived the room where my daughter had slept. I believed she was gone. I carried that pain with me, but I also used it as an excuse. I didn't search. I didn't confirm. I let the past drift away as if it had never existed. Evelyn gently unwrapped the velvet, revealing the familiar silver bracelet. Under the spotlight, the old scratches glimmered faintly, and for the first time in her life, what once symbolized abandonment now lay in the hands of a mother preparing to bow her head. But a few days ago, I saw her again. She didn't die. She lived. She grew up. She came here to Synera. Not for revenge, not to reclaim anything, just to be seen by me. Her voice cracked, and I didn't recognize her. Not only that I hurt her, I humiliated my own daughter. The room froze. Every gaze turned in one direction. Leah stood still, her hand clenched tightly around her bag strap. No one spoke. Evelyn stepped down from the stage. Her expensive heels no longer clicked with pride, but instead fell slowly, heavily, and trembling. She stopped in front of Leah, the daughter she had borne, abandoned and just wounded again. No justifications, no promises, no tears. She held out the bracelet, not to put it back on Leah's wrist, but to place it gently in her open palm. No one else has the right to return this but you. If you still want it. Leah said nothing, but in her eyes for the first time, there was no longing, only the calm of someone who had let go of hope and was beginning to learn forgiveness. And in that very auditorium where Evelyn had once made countless people bow before her power, for the first time, she bowed, not for honor, but for a conscience that had been asleep far too long and was finally waking up. The entire auditorium remained still after Evelyn bowed. No one said a word. There was no applause, no whispers. The silence that followed wasn't from shock. It was because everyone was forced to look inward after the truth had been laid bare. Those who had once joined Evelyn in mocking simplicity, who had confidently rejected applicants for being off-brand, now struggled to stand firmly in their own beliefs. They used to look at Leah as a forgettable intern, a girl who didn't belong in a world of Ivy League grooming, tailored blazers, and eloquent branding jargon. But now, they knew this girl wasn't just Evelyn Laurent's daughter. She was someone who had done what none of them had the courage to do: forgive without fanfare, endure without playing the victim. After the meeting, some tried to approach Leah, awkwardly offering apologies. Others simply nodded quietly, as if admitting they had judged her wrong. But Leah didn't dwell on them. She returned to her small office and began quietly packing her belongings. When Evelyn found her, she saw the wooden box Leah was using to gather personal mementos. On top of everything lay her old job application, still creased at the corner where Evelyn had once carelessly tossed it aside, saying, "Resumes like this don't belong at Synera." "You don't have to leave," Evelyn said, her voice low and genuine, absent of command, stripped of power. "You can stay. Every position, every opportunity, they're waiting for you." Leah looked up. Her eyes held no anger and no joy either. She simply shook her head and replied slowly, as if she'd been carrying this answer the entire time. "You left me once, but that's not what hurt most. What hurt was when you stood in front of me, talked to me, touched me, and didn't recognize me." Evelyn stood, speechless. There were no words left to explain. "I didn't stay hoping to be loved again. I stayed because I thought, if I tried hard enough, maybe I'd be seen. But today, I realize sometimes you have to leave to truly become yourself." Leah didn't wait for a response. She placed the silver bracelet into the box, took one last look at the room that had held both her wounds and her hopes, and walked away, not in anger, but in the freedom she had finally claimed for herself. A few days later, Synera began to change. The executive team started reviewing hiring protocols. Applications once rejected for lack of brand fit were revisited. Marketing campaigns were paused to reassess tone and messaging. And the hallway conversations no longer revolved around watches or status symbols. They began centering on one question: how do we treat the new people here? No one changed because Evelyn commanded them to. They changed because they had seen something that power could no longer hide: the truth and a kind of forgiveness that made it impossible to keep living the same way. Evelyn remained chairwoman. But on her desk, alongside the files, the phone, and the million-dollar contracts, sat something new: a small wooden box with the silver bracelet resting inside. Neat, unmoving. A quiet reminder that there are some things which, if lost, make all power meaningless. Leah's departure wasn't published in internal bulletins. There was no press release, no official statement. But everyone at the company knew all too well, that the girl once dismissed as a cheap-looking intern, not Synera material, was the very person who had made an entire system bow down, without ever raising her voice. Vanessa, the head of communications, who had once said to Leah's face, "People who don't know how to dress should stay behind the screen," could no longer look herself in the mirror each morning. During the Monday meeting, she stood up and requested to withdraw from all branding campaigns for 3 months. Her reason, written in a single line to the board: "I need to relearn how to listen." Elric, the creative director, who once mocked Leah's PowerPoint for being provincial, was not suspended for any violation of company rules. He was suspended because his entire team refused to keep working under a leader who had never once respected the human value behind an idea. They didn't need to say much. Their collective stance spoke for itself. And those who had once stayed silent, the assistants, the administrative staff, the drivers, the cleaners, those who had witnessed Leah being belittled but never dared to speak up, were now the ones changing the most. They began greeting each other with warmer eyes. They listened more patiently to newcomers, and most importantly, they no longer judged people by the shoes they wore or the laptops they carried. In a special internal meeting chaired by Evelyn, there were no data reports, no business strategies. She opened only one document, a list of candidates who had been previously rejected by Synera for being off-brand, not attractive enough, not refined enough, or simply from places the decision-makers had never even stepped foot in. Evelyn spoke quietly. Each person on this list will receive a second call, but not from HR, from the very people who once rejected them. No one objected, because no one felt confident anymore in believing they had the right to decide who was worthy. Then something unexpected happened. Synera's culture began to shift without a single mandate issued. The waiting areas were no longer separated between executives and interviewees. Internal emails began, including a new line in their signatures: "Value doesn't lie in a resume. It lies in how you see the person in front of you." It wasn't a slogan. It was a copy of a sentence Leah had once handwritten on the cover of her personal work notebook, the same notebook Evelyn found in an empty drawer after she left. People began talking less and noticing more. They began asking, "What do you think?" before jumping to conclusions. Not because they were afraid of being wrong, but because they had once been deeply publicly wrong about someone. And that person's silence had left them too ashamed to even say it out loud. 3 weeks after Leah's departure, Synera's grand auditorium was reopened for the annual company assembly. No one expected anything unusual until they walked in and saw at the very center of the stage a single empty chair. Placed on it was a dark wooden box. Inside the box, there were no contracts, no awards, no ornate tokens of wealth. Only an old silver bracelet, resting on black velvet, glinted under the overhead lights. No explanation was needed. Evelyn stepped onto the stage this time without documents or an assistant. She didn't stand tall, as she used to. She walked slowly, shoulders slightly hunched, as if carrying something far too heavy to keep hidden. She didn't give a long speech. She shared only one seemingly simple truth. "When I gave that bracelet away the first time, I was a panicked mother. When I received it back the second time, I was a mother who had lost her child. And now I place it here, to remind myself and all of us never to abandon someone just because they don't match what we expected." She offered no further apologies, no presentations, no moral lectures. She simply bowed before the empty chair, the one Leah might have occupied, and quietly walked off stage. No background music, no highlight reel. And yet every person in the auditorium stood. No one was told to, but they knew that empty chair wasn't just for Leah. It was for the part of themselves they had buried under indifference, casual cruelty, and quiet prejudice. That day, in a forgotten corner of the 18th floor, once just an unused space between conference rooms, a bronze plaque was installed. It bore a single inscription: "Respect is not a luxury. It's the beginning of everything." Below it, handwritten in small letters, unsigned, but known to all, was this line: "You don't have to forgive me, but thank you for not becoming like me." Sometimes the deepest pain isn't being abandoned, it's being forgotten while still standing there. Respect doesn't require a title, just a heart wise enough not to repeat old mistakes. If that resonates with you, like, comment, and subscribe to Toch Story so you never miss the stories that make us reflect on who we are.